I woke up at 5:43 in the morning because my dog, Buck, wouldn't stop barking. Now Buck's old, half blind, sleeps through thunderstorms and fireworks like a retired war vet. So when he starts losing his mind before sunrise, I pay attention. I threw on my boots, grabbed a coffee mug that still had yesterday's coffee in it, walked out onto the porch, and just stood there staring. There was a wall, an actual brick wall, 8 feet high, stretching straight across the only driveway leading off my property, like somebody woke up and decided they were building the Berlin Wall in rural Tennessee. Fresh mortar still wet, construction cones laying sideways in the dirt, and bolted dead center on the bricks was this polished little metal sign that read, "Authorized Perimeter Installation, approved by Cedar Hollow Estates HOA." I remember blinking at it 3 or 4 times because my brain genuinely refused to process the stupidity sitting in front of me. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because sometimes when people do something so unbelievably arrogant, your brain mistakes it for comedy first. See, here's the thing. I'm not part of Cedar Hollow Estates. Never was. Never signed a covenant, never attended a meeting, never paid a single HOA fee in my life. My property sits right beside their subdivision, 10 acres of inherited farmland my Uncle Walt left me before he passed, while their little luxury development showed up years later with fake stone entry signs, decorative street lamps, and those creepy identical mailboxes lined up like military recruits. My place. Gravel driveway, rusty red barn, wind chimes on the porch, an old Chevy pickup that coughs like a lifelong smoker but still runs every damn morning. Apparently that offended them. For years, the HOA president, a guy named Grant Holloway, had been trying to buy me out. First, he came over smiling like a politician during election season, talking about community expansion opportunities. Then the offers got bigger. Then the tone changed. Suddenly my property was hurting neighborhood aesthetics. My barn was visually disruptive. One lady from the HOA literally told me my truck looked like economic depression on wheels. I told her that truck survived 3 transmissions, 2 ex-wives, and a flood in '97, so it'd probably outlive her yoga club too. She didn't laugh. But underneath all their complaints was something else: control. Cedar Hollow wasn't really a neighborhood. It was a social status machine. Everybody competed over lawn stripes, property values, who had the nicest outdoor kitchen, who installed the newest backyard waterfall. And then there was me, sitting next door with chickens wandering through my yard and target practice signs hanging near the tree line. I was the stain on their brochure. The problem was, this land wasn't just dirt to me. My uncle taught me how to rebuild carburetors in that barn. My first dog was buried under the oak tree near the fence. Every inch of that property had fingerprints on it from people I loved. So no matter how much money they waved around, I wasn't selling. Apparently Grant took that personally. Standing there that morning, staring at that wall, I realized something dangerous had finally happened. These people had convinced themselves they were untouchable. They honestly believed money, lawsuits, and HOA authority gave them the right to trap another human being on his own land. And the wildest part? They thought they'd already won. About 30 minutes later, one of their contractors rolled up in a white work truck, took one look at me standing by the wall sipping coffee, and immediately froze. You could see the exact moment he realized nobody had told me about the construction. I asked him one question, calm as could be. "You boys happen to know whose land this wall's sitting on?" Man looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. Didn't answer, just climbed back in his truck and left gravel flying everywhere. That's when I made a phone call. Sheriff's deputy came out around 7 a.m., walked the property line with me while I showed him survey markers and deed paperwork. He kept shaking his head the whole time like a guy watching someone slowly back their boat into a lake without tying it to the trailer first. Finally, he looked at me and said, "You want us to force them to tear it down?" And right there, that's when the idea hit me. Because see, there was one tiny detail Cedar Hollow HOA didn't know. 5 years earlier, during a quiet county surplus auction nobody paid attention to, I bought Old Quarry Road, the abandoned access road connecting their entire subdivision to the main highway. Cheap too. Barely cost more than a fishing boat. Completely legal. Fully documented. Which meant the wall they built wasn't just illegal. They had accidentally picked a fight with the one man who owned the road underneath every luxury SUV in their precious gated community. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I was inspired. Now before I tell you what happened next, Let me explain something about HOAs because a lot of people hear homeowners association and immediately picture angry retirees measuring grass with rulers. And honestly, sometimes that stereotype exists for a reason. But according to standard procedure, an HOA only has authority over properties that voluntarily join the association through legal covenants tied to the deed. That's the important part right there. They can complain about your house all day long, but if your property isn't legally inside their jurisdiction, their power stops at the edge of their map. From a legal perspective, what Cedar Hollow did was unbelievably reckless because once you build a permanent structure on someone else's land without permission, you're stepping into trespassing territory, property damage territory, even civil liability if you block access to a residence. And here's where it gets interesting psychologically. This is a psychological trap wealthy communities fall into all the time. The longer people live inside controlled environments where rules always bend in their favor, the more they confuse social influence with actual legal authority. Grant and his HOA board weren't thinking like criminals. They were thinking like people who'd never been told no before. That combination, money, pride, and public image, man, that'll make smart people do some unbelievably stupid things. And trust me, they were just getting started. So after the deputy left, I sat on my porch for maybe an hour just thinking about how far these people had pushed things. Most folks would have hired a lawyer right there, maybe gone screaming into a courtroom demanding emergency orders and compensation. But honestly, I didn't want revenge nearly as much as I wanted perspective. I wanted every single person inside Cedar Hollow to understand exactly what it feels like when somebody with money and authority decides the rules don't apply to them anymore. And once that idea got into my head, well, it spread fast. By lunchtime, I'd already called my buddy Travis, who owns a welding shop about 20 miles outside town. Travis is one of those guys who says, "I got just the thing," in situations where normal human beings should probably involve attorneys. 2 hours later, he pulls into my driveway hauling this enormous cattle gate behind his flatbed trailer, 14 feet tall, heavy steel tubing, ugly as homemade sin. I told him I wanted it painted the brightest color imaginable. He chose neon green, said it looked legally aggressive. I nearly hugged him. We installed that monster right where the HOA wall ended, directly across Old Quarry Road. Then I added signs, big reflective signs. Private road. No trespassing. Toll access only. And my personal favorite, unauthorized entry subject to removal. By sunset, the thing looked less like a gate and more like a psychological weapon. But I still wasn't done. See, a few years back, Travis bought an old toll booth from a racetrack auction because apparently rednecks collect strange things when left unsupervised. Tiny little booth with sliding windows and faded yellow paint. We dragged that thing right into the middle of Old Quarry Road and anchored it down facing Cedar Hollow's main entrance. Then I printed fee schedules. Residents, $300 monthly access permit. Delivery drivers, $15 per entry. Commercial contractors, $50 daily access. HOA board members, $1,000 monthly premium inconvenience package. Non-refundable. Around midnight, we finished setting everything up and stood there admiring our work under the floodlights like two raccoons proud of overturning a garbage can. I slept better that night than I had in months. Next morning, absolute chaos. By 7 a.m., traffic was backed up nearly half a mile. BMWs, Teslas, luxury SUVs packed bumper to bumper because Cedar Hollow only had one entrance in or out, Old Quarry Road. My road. Folks were honking, yelling, trying to figure out why some giant green gate suddenly looked like the entrance to Jurassic Park. I sat inside the toll booth drinking gas station coffee while Buck slept beside me like we were running a family business. Around 8:15, here comes Grant Holloway marching down the road in loafers and golf clothes carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. Guy looked ready to have a stroke. "What the hell is this?" he shouted before he even reached the booth. I slid the little toll window open nice and slow. "Morning, Grant. You cannot block access to this community." "Actually," I said, sliding the paperwork toward him, "I absolutely can." He grabbed the fee schedule, and his face went red so fast I thought his heart might explode right there on my gravel. $300 a month. Are you insane? That's for residents, I said. Your board members pay $1,000. Man, the silence after that was beautiful. Then came the explosion. He started threatening lawsuits, county inspectors, Emergency injunctions, local news stations, the mayor, just throwing words around hoping one of them would scare me. But every single threat bounced right off because I'd already done my homework. I already filed a trespassing complaint, already submitted drone footage showing their contractors building on my property, already had copies of county plats, road ownership documents, survey maps. Hell, I laminated some of it just to be disrespectful. Grant finally leaned into the toll booth window and hissed, "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" And I swear to God, I smiled when I answered him. "Yeah," I said, "people who thought they could trap me inside my own property." That shut him up for exactly 3 seconds. Then the man completely lost emotional control. Started ranting about community image and property standards and protecting investments. And right there he accidentally exposed the real motive behind all of it. This was never about safety, never about regulations. They hated the idea that somebody outside their social system refused to obey it. My little farmhouse sitting beside their polished neighborhood reminded them they couldn't buy total control over everything they could see. And that drove them crazy. Around noon, deputies showed back up because several residents called complaining about unlawful obstruction. That conversation didn't go the way Grant expected either. Sheriff's office reviewed the deed records again, confirmed the road belonged to me, confirmed the HOA wall crossed onto my property, and basically told everybody this was now a civil dispute caused by Cedar Hollow's own actions. Watching those HOA board members realize their money couldn't magically rewrite property law. Man, that was satisfying in a deeply spiritual way. But the real turning point came later that evening. See, wealthy neighborhoods survive on appearances. Image is currency. Reputation is oxygen. And once cracks start showing publicly, panic spreads fast. So I decided to help things along. I mailed packets to every single homeowner in Cedar Hollow. Full timeline of events. Photographs of the construction crews building the wall. Copies of the road deed proving I own the access road. Drone screenshots with highlighted property boundaries. And attached to the front page was one short letter. Your HOA board spent approximately $92,000 of association funds constructing an illegal barrier on private property while exposing residents to potential liability and restricted roadway access. This situation can be resolved immediately upon removal of the wall, reimbursement for damages, and formal written apology. That letter hit Cedar Hollow like a grenade. Within 24 hours, residents started turning on each other. People who'd spent years smiling through HOA cookouts suddenly screaming during emergency meetings because now this stupidity was affecting their home values, commute times, and bank accounts. One resident apparently threatened legal action against the HOA board personally. Another demanded a forensic audit. Somebody leaked board emails online. It got ugly fast. And the funniest part? Half the neighborhood didn't even know about the wall project until they got my letter. Grant and his inner circle approved the whole thing privately because they genuinely believed nobody would challenge them successfully. That's what arrogance does. It blinds you to consequences. 3 days later, county inspectors arrived and documented the illegal construction. 4 days later, the HOA's attorney contacted me sounding exhausted already, talking about de-escalation opportunities. I told him de-escalation should have started before they built a prison wall across my driveway. By the end of the week, demolition crews were back at my property tearing the wall apart brick by brick. And let me tell you something. Hearing those bricks crumble felt better than therapy. Grant avoided me the entire time. Wouldn't even step out of his vehicle. The same man who once called my property a rural embarrassment now sat behind tinted windows watching contractors clean up his disaster. 2 weeks later, he resigned as HOA president. Official statement said he was stepping away for personal reasons. Yeah, those reasons were public humiliation and possible lawsuits. About a month after all this started, I got a certified envelope in the mail from Cedar Hollow Estates HOA. Inside was a check covering every penny I spent. Gate installation, toll booth transport, reseeding grass damaged by construction equipment, legal filing costs, everything. No argument. No negotiation. Just payment. And technically speaking, I could have removed the gate after that. Problem solved, right? But I didn't. Gate stayed exactly where it was. Neon green. Tall enough to be seen from half the county. Because sometimes a reminder matters more than revenge. Every morning now, Cedar Hollow residents drive past that gate on their way to work. Most don't even notice it anymore. But I guarantee you the board members do. And every single time they see it, they remember the month they tried to bully a quiet country neighbor, without realizing he owned the road beneath all four of their tires. You know, the older I get, the more I realize stories like this usually aren't really about property lines or brick walls or HOA bylaws. That stuff's just the packaging. What they're really about is control, who thinks they have it, who refuses to surrender it, and what happens when pride starts overriding common sense. Because here's the truth. Cedar Hollow could have avoided this entire disaster with one honest conversation. 1. If Grant had walked onto my porch and said, "Look, we don't love how your place affects the neighborhood image, but we respect your rights." None of this probably happens. But that's not what power does to certain people. Once folks get used to winning every argument with money, committees, and legal threats, they stop seeing neighbors as human beings and start seeing them as obstacles. And man, that mindset is dangerous. According to standard procedure, property law in America is actually pretty straightforward. Ownership matters, documentation matters, boundaries matter. Doesn't matter how expensive your subdivision is or how fancy your entrance fountain looks. You cannot simply manufacture authority where none exists. From a legal perspective, the second Cedar Hollow built that wall, they crossed from annoying HOA behavior into genuine liability. But honestly, the legal lesson isn't even the important part to me anymore. The lesson here is never underestimate quiet people, especially country people, especially older folks sitting on inherited land. A lot of them know things. They know county records, easements, auctions, old handshake agreements nobody remembers anymore. They've watched towns grow around them for decades. And while everybody else is busy showing off status online, those people are quietly paying attention. This is a psychological trap modern communities fall into all the time. They mistake silence for weakness. They assume if somebody lives simply, talks softly, or keeps to themselves, then they must be powerless. That assumption ruins people every day. And honestly, I think that's why this story hit such a nerve online when folks first heard about it. Deep down, everybody's dealt with some version of Cedar Hollow before. Maybe not an HOA. Maybe it was a boss, a landlord, a city official, a rich neighbor, somebody who thought influence meant ownership over other people's lives. So when regular people watch someone finally push back intelligently instead of violently, it feels satisfying. Not because revenge is healthy, but because dignity matters. Anyway, that's my story. And I gotta ask, if somebody built a wall across your driveway, what would you have done? Would you take the high road? Or would you build a neon green toll gate just petty enough to make a point? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe. Because trust me, small town America is full of stories people wouldn't believe if they weren't true.